What's up, you absolutely wonderful Magento loving friends of mine? Joseph from SwiftOtter here with another knowledge bite, a piece of knowledge to enhance your expert status. This one was a little bit more related to DevOps, maybe a little less on the developer side, but it also kind of brings into this business practitioner piece in as well. So there's a lot of disciplines that this covers. It's highly relevant. And I even managed to throw in a little Star Wars reference in here. I don't think anybody is against a Star Wars reference here once in a while. We throw it in. Lord of the Rings too. You know, you have all these great series. You got to include it once in a while. So let's take a look and see what the problem is, and then we'll explore a solution for this problem. Take a look at this. A merchant's primary domain is jarwarswidgets.com. However, after an SEO audit, you are notified that the domain name variant www.jarwarswidgets.com uses a 302 temporary redirect. They are requesting your team changes this to redirect to a 301 permanent redirect. Okie doke. How do you suggest they resolve this issue? All right. So this is a very common issue. I would argue that this should be dealt with before the site goes live, but hey, you know, maybe it came to you as a rescue project or whatever. Like this is something that's really important to know, and I would suggest making sure it's part of your pre-launch checklist. All I'm trying to say right there. What are the options that we have here in this type of a scenario? Well, they're fairly simple. Number one, or A in this case, use the web server redirect rules to perform the redirect to the primary domain name. B, use Magento's store configuration to auto redirect the base URL, or edit robots.txt to disallow the variant domain name. All of these are somewhat correct, or perhaps you could argue that every one of them is a reasonable solution. So in a situation like this, we have to weigh the pros and the cons of these different solutions. And hopefully as you're working through said problem or whatever relation it is, or completely unrelated type of problem, you sit down, you identify several options, and then you come up with a pros and cons. That's literally what we are doing here in this scenario. Let's look at each one of these individually. Starting with A, use the web server redirect rules to perform the redirect to the primary domain name, or use the redirect rules. Okay, so what we're saying here is perhaps you would use the Nginx web server rules. You could use Cloudflare in this case. One of the commenters recommended Fastly. So if you're using Adobe Commerce Cloud, you definitely should be doing those redirects at the Fastly level. The idea is to make it so it doesn't even have to get to the web server. So that's option one. Let's look at option number two, and we'll make an assessment here at the end of this conversation. So use Magento's store configuration to auto redirect base URL with the 301 redirect. Now, what this is referencing is this screen here in store configuration. This is actually our SwiftOtter.com admin panel that you are looking at right here. And you will see that we are using the default configuration auto redirect to base URL set to this. So what we see if we uncheck use system value is we have three different options here. Number one, we can prevent Magento from doing any redirecting at all, which would be even more of a red flag on this SEO audit, because the auto redirect to base URL, I mean, at least it's going somewhere right now by default. If we were set this to no, that means our www.jarwarswidgets.com would also render content just like jarwarswidgets.com without the www. So that's, yeah, this would no is very not good. Let me put it that way. So the default is what was flagged, and we could also switch this over to yes, as far as 301 permanent redirect. This would satisfy the criteria just like answer B is referencing. Now, let me ask you this question. In order for this to actually register, where is, what would have to happen? Well, the Magento application would have to spool up. It has to read the store configuration. It has to understand what its domain name is. And I hate to say it, but that's not the fastest approach. It's going to take a little bit of time. It might be, and this is kind of an off-the-wall solution that we have actually had to do in the past. I would not say it's ideal, and ultimately, I think there are better options now with Cloudflare and perhaps Fastly. I have not gotten that deep on the Fastly side myself, but you could use, theoretically, and if you're not using Cloudflare for sure, you could use the index.php file and edit it. Do I recommend doing this? You have to be really careful with your with the whole composer update process, because that can all be wiped out, or it's actually technically should be wiped out in your pub index.php file. And so keep that in mind if you do edit your pub index.php. I wouldn't consider best practice. I wouldn't even recommend it, but I would put it as kind of a distant option out there in the event that you might have some complex redirect rules. Now, these complex redirect rules might be helpful if you are, as you migrate from, well, not Magento 1 anymore, but from like another platform over to Magento, and and there are some complex rules to allow these redirects to flow over correctly. So you could use an index.php file, perhaps in that case, which would then bypass the Magento application from spooling. Not quite as fast as using the web server, but it would work okay. So that's kind of a side option, not recommended, not best practice, but sometimes, well, life is not always best practice. But in the case of using just a simple domain name level redirect, you certainly wouldn't need to use an index.php file there. So at the end of the day, it flows through that index.php file, spools up the application, and you now have a redirect. Now, could that be cached? Yeah, hopefully, but ultimately, every single URL on that with that www domain would have to be cached as far as a redirect. So all this, it's not an ideal solution any way I can think of it. I just would not recommend using this type of value in this situation. So we're going to leave this alone. We're going to leave this as 302 found. Now, the other option here is to edit the robots.txt file to disallow the variant domain name. Okay, maybe this works. I don't know. It just seems risky to me, and I wouldn't recommend it. So I'm going to argue that C is not a good option either. Out of these three options, the number one option that I would choose wholeheartedly is A. You want to be using the web server redirects in any case possible, and that doesn't go for just domain level redirects. I mean, if you can build lists of redirects, those all go at the web server level. Don't rely on the Magento URL rewrite capabilities at all. Just don't. Like, I mean, okay, maybe a one-off thing for a merchant that a merchant just needs to do even as an emergency. I get that. Like, they sent out an email. I've done this myself. They sent out an email and included the wrong URL, and it got by their quality control processes. I get that. That stuff happens, right? So that's maybe a case for a URL rewrite. But in this case, there's no reason for it. Use web server redirects any way you can, and even try to go a step beyond web server redirects to use Fastly. Well, I mean, honestly, if you're not using Fastly, you should be using Cloudflare. I'm sure that's clear by now. Like, I think that's just normal behavior, but like, you should be using Cloudflare. Everybody should be on Cloudflare if they're not using some other type of web application firewall. So, WAF. So at the end of the day, Cloudflare, web server redirects, those are the best options, or Fastly, I guess. Those are the best options for quickly getting a domain level redirect there set. Great work on this. I hope that you found this little knowledge bite helpful. Keep up the good work, and we will see you next week.